One day, 3-year-old Dorothy is playing by herself at home when she accidentally tumbles down the stairs and is knocked unconscious by a blow to the head. When her family finds the little girl, she has stopped breathing. The family urgently calls a doctor, but unfortunately what has happened is that the little girl has died. Devastated by the news from the doctor, the family puts the body of their little child to bed, and the doctor leaves the house to bring the death certificate. About an hour later, the doctor and the little girl's family enter the girl's room to retrieve the body and are shocked by the scene that shocks them all. The little girl was playing with her toys as if nothing had happened. The doctor examines the little girl again and again. There are no injuries, no permanent damage. The little girl is very much alive. The doctor expresses surprise that this is a case of a near-death experience. But there is one point where the doctor is wrong. It was not Dorothy who came back from the dead, but someone else. Welcome to the incredible life story of Dorothy Eady. Dorothy Eady was born in London in 1904. She was a normally behaving little girl until the day she fell down the stairs, died, and was miraculously resurrected. But after the incident that day, Dorothy's parents observed great changes in her. The little girl began to have nightmares at night. She tells her mother that in her dreams she is in a building with gardens and pools among great pillars. Over the next months, Dorothy had the same dream over and over again, waking up at night sweating profusely and crying, "I want to go home." Her parents try to calm her by telling her, "This is your home," but over time this causes the little girl to become depressed. When her parents ask their daughter where the house she wants to go to is, the little girl cries and says she doesn't know. After her resurrection, Dorothy's accent also begins to change. Her accent becomes more and more rude and sharply worded English. This became so disturbing that it became difficult for the family to find a babysitter for their little girl. One day, when the little girl was 4 years old, her parents took her to the British Museum, and things took a strange turn. Like many of her peers, the little girl is bored in the museum, but as soon as she gets to the ancient Egyptian section of the museum, she becomes mesmerized and cheerful. When she sees the statues of pharaohs from ancient Egypt, something extraordinary happens. Focusing on the statues as if hypnotized, the little girl lets go of her mother's hand, takes off her shoes, and starts kissing the feet of the statues. At that moment, she reacts to those who pass by the statues by saying, "How dare you walk with shoes in the presence of the gods?" Her mother is literally horrified by her daughter's behavior. Suddenly, Dorothy's excitement stops. Sadness covers the little girl's face. When her parents go to their daughter, they see her looking with tearful eyes at a mummy lying in a glass coffin. When her mother tries to pull the little girl to her, Dorothy does not take her mother's hand. Looking at the mummy lying in the glass case, she says in a heavy Middle Eastern accent that belies her age, "These are my people." From that day on, the family takes their little girl to the museum every chance they get. Because this museum is the only place where Dorothy can smile and be happy. When Dorothy turns 7, her father buys her an encyclopedia for children. The little girl's only interest is the encyclopedia. She spends hours studying the photographs and pictures in it, especially the hieroglyphics. When her worried mother asked her what she was doing, Dorothy replied, "I'm trying to remember." The family buys all the magazines with similar content for their daughter's happiness. In one of these history magazines, Dorothy came across an image of the Temple of Seti in the city of Abydos. Surprised and confused, the little girl goes to her mother and shows her the temple. "Where are the trees, the pools, the flowers?" she asks her mother. Stunned, her mother asks, "What is this place, my daughter?" Dorothy answers her mother with a big smile on her face, "This is my home." Stories of children remembering their previous lives are common throughout history. Usually, children lose these memories by the age of 6. In the case of Dorothy Eady, however, things took the opposite course. As the little girl grows older, her memories become clearer and clearer, until the day she finally remembers exactly who she is and when she lived. 3,000 years ago. Throughout her life, Dorothy has spoken openly about reincarnation in all kinds of settings. But as a young girl in the 1920s, her interesting lifestyle was frowned upon by British society. On one occasion, the priest of the church where the family went for sermons came to the family home and told them that their daughter was no longer welcome in the church. When the family asked why, he told them that their daughter was not singing the hymns of Egyptian cruelty in the Bible, and that the worship of Jesus was a false religion borrowed from Egyptian beliefs. Dorothy spent so much of her time at the British Museum that one day Sir Wallace Budge, the museum's chief Egyptologist, began to teach her how to read and write the scrolls. According to Budge, Dorothy's learning of the ancient language was mind-bogglingly fast. Dorothy's dreams never ceased, but now that the young girl was becoming aware of things, she was no longer afraid of them. At the age of 15, Dorothy began to wake up frequently at night. According to her, she heard the voice of a being called Hora at night, and Hora told her to write down everything that I tell you. This goes on for a full year. Dorothy woke up at night, in a semi-trance state, completely controlled by her subconscious mind, and wrote down everything the voice told her, both in English and in Egyptian. At the end of a year, a 70-page book has been created, and, even more surprisingly, the handwriting in her trance notes is completely different from her normal handwriting. When Dorothy completed the 70-page book, she realized that the story she had written was in fact the story of her own life. 3,000 years ago, she had written down her life line by line. Dorothy's life in Egypt is like this. She was a woman named Benthresda who lived 3,000 years ago, born in the city of Abydos. Her father was a soldier in the army during the reign of Pharaoh Setwars. Her mother grew and sold vegetables. When Benthresda was 2 years old, her mother died. Her father could not take care of her properly, so he sent her to become a temple priestess. When she was 12, the temple where she trained gave her two choices. Either she could leave the temple to live on her own, or she could dedicate herself to the gods as a holy temple maiden. Benthresda chose to remain a temple priestess and swore an oath of allegiance. But a few years later, she has an illicit affair with the pharaoh of the time, the first Set, and becomes pregnant. Upon learning of this, the high priest of the temple announces that Benthresda will be punished with death for breaking her vow to the holy Isis and committing one of the greatest sins. To prevent the events from escalating and bringing dishonor to the pharaoh, the young priestess takes her own life one evening. Dorothy now has a clear recollection of her past, and in a twist of fate, soon after regaining her memory, she finds a job at an Egyptian public relations magazine published in London. After a while, she married Ayman Abdelmagoud, an Egyptian businessman whom she met through her job at the magazine, and for the first time in her life, she had the chance to visit Egypt, which she calls her real country. And more importantly, she gets the chance to prove to the world that she is really a reincarnated Egyptian nun. Dorothy's marriage doesn't last long, and her marriage ends. But Dorothy, who had a son during this period, named her child after Seti, the pharaoh she had fallen in love with thousands of years ago, and changed her own name to Omm Sety, which means Mother of Seti, just as mothers in ancient Egypt were named in public. In 1935, Dorothy finds a job at the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities, and although she is the first female employee hired at the time, she quickly makes a name for herself at the ministry. She was constantly writing articles on ancient Egypt. She translated newly discovered hieroglyphic scrolls. As a result of all this effort, in 1952, she was hired as part of the archaeological team in charge of the Abydos excavations, despite having no training in the subject. At last, Dorothy was reunited with her homeland. During these years of living in Egypt, she was recognized by the public as a rather unusual figure. This was mainly due to the fact that she spent most of her time in the temple precincts even after her day job was over, walking barefoot in the sand and performing ancient rituals in the evenings, singing hymns that no one could make sense of. In 1957, the new head of the ministry decided to test this woman he had heard so much about. One evening, with only the light of a torch, they go to a large area of the temple that has only recently been discovered. Dorothy has never been there before in her life. In fact, this area has only recently been discovered. The ministry official asks Dorothy to take him to the places he wants with the weak light of the torch. Dorothy proves to the minister that she knows every corner of the temple like the back of her hand. And she doesn't even stop there. She tells the authorities that there are ancient gardens and pools in an undiscovered underground part of the temple. Archaeologists excavated exactly where she had pointed and indeed discovered the remains of ancient pools and gardens. And not only that, Dorothy points to another place to the north of the temple, also buried for thousands of years, and says that there is a secret compartment there, and the excavations begin. As you can imagine, an ancient site is discovered there too, the existence of which was never known before. Although her specialty is the Temple of Abydos, Dorothy also has incredible knowledge about other ancient sites in Egypt. And thanks to her, many new sites are discovered. For example, she told them that the tomb of Nefertiti, which had been searched for years, was hidden under the tomb of her stepson Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered in 1922. Dorothy made this claim in 1972. At first, archaeologists thought that she had become old and was now making inconsistent speculations, because there was absolutely no trace of a chamber under the tomb. But in 2015, with advanced radar technology, they looked under the tomb again and found a secret room under the grave, just as Dorothy had said. Another example is Dorothy's claim about the mysterious Sphinx. Dorothy mentions that there is an ancient library hidden under the Sphinx, and again, at the time, not many people believed her. However, just like the discovery of Nefertiti's lost tomb, a radar scan was made under the Sphinx and a missing room was found. Dorothy herself said that underneath the lowest altar stone of the Temple of Abydos, where she worked, there was a section that belonged to the gods themselves, long before her time. According to her, there was a kind of doorway that allowed the ancient gods to travel between the heavens and the earth. But since the knowledge of how to use this gate was forgotten during the pharaonic periods after the gods, the gate was closed and preserved as a sacred space. For those of you who say, "No way," let me tell you. Once again, radar is used to examine under the temple, and exactly the structure Dorothy was talking about is found. But the Egyptian government immediately forbids any excavation of the room. The reason given was that the chamber was an important part of the temple's headstone and the temple might collapse. Just as the Egyptian government banned the excavation of the chamber of ancient records beneath the Sphinx. Although reincarnation may seem like an extreme case, in fact, a large part of the world's population believes in this phenomenon. It is especially possible to find detailed information on this subject in Eastern belief philosophy. According to Eastern philosophy, the souls in our bodies are constantly moving in a cycle until they reach the level of divine being again. Every evil or good deed we did in our previous life will help our soul to progress in the next life. Or conversely, it will punish us. In short, we create our own heaven or hell in the next life by the choices and behaviors we make in this life. And in the end, if you manage to mature, maybe after tens, maybe after thousands of lifetimes, you get the chance to be truly one with the Creator. The extraordinary life and story of Dorothy Eady is now considered to be one of the greatest proofs of reincarnation, and an Egyptian priestess who took her own life 3,000 years ago has left us today with mind-boggling and priceless insights into ancient Egyptian culture. Thank you all for watching the video. If you want this kind of content to continue, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Take care until we see you in the next video.